Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight to celebrate author Melly Chai's new book, Tomorrow in Shanghai, a conversation with fellow author Nina de Gramont. Before we begin, if you have any questions during the event, please put them in the chat or in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of the screen. If you'd like to support Flyleaf and tonight's authors, we have copies of May and Nina's books available for purchase on our website or if you click the buy button down below. Meili Chai is the author of 11 books of fiction, nonfiction, and translation, including her latest short story collection, Tomorrow in Shanghai and Other Stories. Her writing has been awarded a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Bachin Award for Writing by a Woman, Asia Pacific American Award for Literature, and named a Kiriyama Prize Notable Book. And fun fact, she's a board member of the National Book Critics Circle. She's joined by Nina de Gramont, who is the author of 9 books, including the New York Times bestseller The Christie Affair, which was the Reese's Book Club pick for February of this year. And fun fact, Nina teaches creative writing at UNCW. I'm going to minimize myself now so we can focus on the authors, but I'll pop back in about 45 minutes so we can do the Q&A section.
Thank you. Hey, Millie.
Thank you so much, Seth. It's so nice to see you, Nina. I miss you. I also used to teach at UNCW.
Yes, I miss you too. And congratulations on this amazing collection of short stories and all the wonderful acclaim that it's been getting. I've been reading the reviews anyway, but it was so fun to really sit down with them preparing for this and look through them and see how many very illustrious authors are singing your praises and talking about the book. Has it been an exciting release so far for you?
I don't know if I'd say exciting. I mean, it's great. I feel very fulfilled and happy that the book is finding an audience and people have liked it. That's always nerve-wracking before a book
Yeah.
is released. But because of the pandemic and all of that, I feel very stressed out all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's I think that there's always a surreal element to a book coming out in the world anyway, and especially now when the events are virtual and you're sort of seeing everything unfold. It's really like watching it happen to somebody else, I think, when your book first comes out in the current world.
Yes, I don't even know if do you hear that echo? It's not echoing.
I don't hear it now.
I won't worry about it. I'll just ignore it.
Okay.
I've been feeling out of sorts just because of all the events of the world. Like there's so much stress. There's the political things going on. There's still anti-Asian hate things. And then I'm acting chair of my department. So I'm just like, oh my
What?
God, I don't know how to
Yeah,
do.
that's a lot. Well, I think that your book is such an important one to read right now, for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned. And when we talked about starting this event, I think the idea that we came up with was talking about, what it's like to construct complicated women characters. But I actually want to start off by talking about asking you about a couple of the men that you created in your title story, because I don't think that we can really talk about your book in terms of the sort of complicated, multi layered characters without talking about um, Zhang Xiaoling. I hope I didn't mangle that pronunciation, and the doctor. So I'm just really curious about um, how you created those two characters and decided to put them side by side. And one's named and one's not named. And it just seems so intricate and beautifully laid out on the page.
Well, thank you, Nina. This came from research. There was actually a series of executions in China of people who were so-called 血头 blood sellers. It used to be legal for these mobile blood units to go around the countryside and buy blood from people in villages, and then they would sell it, or they were doing it on behalf of hospitals in the cities, and so then they would, give them the plasma from that. And because they were mobile units, they didn't have standard means for sterilizing the equipment. So they inadvertently spread HIV throughout villages all over central China, especially in Henan province. And so I have been doing research on this around the time that China was being considered to join the WTO, which around year 2000, 2001. And one of the things that was going on is that China was also using organs from executed prisoners to, just use as organs for people who needed organ transplants, because they didn't really have a donor culture. And so there was a stipulation that China would need to stop doing that, the execution of prisoners and the extraction of their organs, but they were given a time period in which they could continue. And I just thought, that's so wild, right? Like, by one standard, you feel like this is not something you should do, but we're going to give you a period of time when you can do it while you transition. And so it's like very gray in terms of morality, right? And law. Like, we know this is wrong, but it's okay to do it up until this point.
Right.
And so I felt it was the same thing with these blood sellers, right? It was a legal job for a while. And then after it was discovered by the central government that this was happening and this was the path to creating an AIDS epidemic, then it became illegal. But the word didn't necessarily trickle down. And so people who were found to doing this, which would have been a legal job, were then tried as criminals and executed. So I thought about that situation and like, who gets to be considered a criminal, who is punished for a law that changes, even if it's a heinous thing, and then who is kind of complicit in that, and who has power, who doesn't have power. And a lot of people don't have power, but can still make personal choices. And so I thought that was an interesting contrast. So that's a long answer to your question.
No, I love that. And I thought, so one thing that I thought was so artfully done is that they both were doing the things that they were doing for very similar reasons. Both of them were horribly in debt and had these families to take care of, and had sort of made this moral decision to do something that maybe felt very oogly to them. And then there's this moment where, this very macabre moment where they intersect. I also was interested in the fact that Xiaobing, it wasn't only him that was in peril, but his family, like his parents and his child, had to escape to a different province and hide out. Would they have been in legal peril too?
Not necessarily, but they don't have any way to make a living. And my idea was that they were leaving so they could try to get help, right? They're going to try to get money to get a lawyer from outside the province to help him. And the only way would be to leave and to go to work in a city. But they don't do it fast enough, right? And so there's a number of people who are executed and their families don't claim the body, or there's people who die in hospitals of poverty and their families don't claim them. And I always thought, what happens to the family? Like, where are they? And part of it is they may not know yet. Part of it is they may be working, because often people who die in poverty, the families then build for the cost of the hospitalization. In China, when you're executed, they bill the family for the price of the bullet. So there's reason why they wouldn't want to stay.
Wow, there's such a powerful moment where he goes to suture up the wound and they're laughing and saying, stop that, you fancy doctor. We don't bother with that here. It's really chilling. I was thinking about, so I think that was a really gutsy story to start the collection with, because you have these two characters that readers, I attach to the situation, but I was thinking about, you hear a lot lately in terms of all kinds of fictional characters, the words likable. And I was wondering about your feelings about the intersection between the words complicated and sympathetic and likable, and which of those words is important to you, not only as a writer, but as a reader and as a consumer of media in general.
Thank you, Nina. That's such a great question. Great question. Likable. Do you like to write about likable characters?
Well, you know, I saw this great, I wish I could remember who it was because it's sort of a well-known person on Twitter. And she recently tweeted, you know, I want to tell people you are the unlikable character in somebody's story. You know, everybody is. So what is a likable character? I think about that a lot. And I mean, a lot of times people ask me if I like a particular character that I've written. And usually my answer is yes. I mean, if I'm writing someone who's very clearly a supervillain, then no. I can think of sort of peripheral characters I've written whom I don't like. But I think almost any character whose perspective I've taken, I like them, which doesn't necessarily mean I've tried to make them likable.
That's a great answer. I'm interested in interesting characters.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I've noticed, and that's why I thought that this conversation could work. With the Christie affair, you begin with the quote unquote mistress, right? We're finding out about an affair with the beloved author Agatha Christie's husband and a much younger woman. That's, by, I don't know, many standards, not a likable character. And she even says that at one point to the reader, directly saying this about, but she becomes a very fascinating character. And we learn more about her history. And so we understand the path she's taking and why she takes them. And that's what I feel about with my characters. And I mean, it was deliberate. The Bloodsellers are probably the most hated people in China, at least for a certain period of time. People hated them. They put all of their hatred for this situation of the AIDS epidemic onto Bloodsellers. And they didn't think about, well, why were they doing this job? Why was this a legal job? Whose idea in the hierarchy of power was for them to do this? And then was it solved by killing them? And the answer is no, it wasn't solved.
Yeah.
So I thought for me, that was just very an intriguing dilemma.
Yeah.
And I hope the reader will find it intriguing enough to continue.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to me, that's the kind of thing that that you get sort of faulty feedback on. So I'm glad that nobody gave you that faulty feedback, and that because to me, it's sort of it's so deftly done and done in such deft strokes in a way that makes me think about so many things that I think it's a brilliant story to open with, because it makes me really trust you as we go into the different kinds of narratives.
I have to thank my publisher, Blair and Lynn York, and my editor, Robin Mura, because they supported me in this decision. And they never said, oh, you have to start with something softer or, ease people in. No, they're like, this is a great story. They totally supported me starting with this.
I love that. It's a bold, brave move. All right. So I had to ask you this because I'm a big fan of your nonfiction. And I'm wondering if your experience writing about real people, you write about your family a lot, and complicated relationships and complex relationships between the different members of your family, particularly the women in your family. Your mother comes across in your writing as very flawed. At the same time, your love for her really comes through, and the importance of her in your life really comes through. Can you talk about recreating her on the page, and if that in any way informs the way you create fictional characters?
Let me think. For many, maybe decades, I could not write about my mother because it was too hard for me to understand. I couldn't understand her choices. I also felt such pain from her death. She died when I was 28. I was her caregiver for 2 years. It was just a brutal, wrenching death that I didn't want to happen. I did everything in my power to try to save her. And we had no resolution. We had no resolution. But so every mother I wrote about was based in fiction, was not based on her. It was based on maybe one or the other of my grandmothers. Because I couldn't understand my mother. And then I just reached a point where I suddenly thought, oh my God, I have to write about my mother. Not because like someone was asking me, but I just felt the need. I had to do it. And that really opened up a lot. So I've been writing a lot of essays in which I explore this relationship and try to understand my mother. Rather than thinking of her as flawed, I think of her as very traumatized. She had a horrific upbringing. And what's fascinating or horrifying maybe in this moment is that my mother's upbringing is from that time period that like the MAGA people think was the golden age of America. When women had no rights, when a man could legally beat his wife and children, as is what happened to her. She grew up with domestic violence. She grew up with violence against herself, her body, and she never had any access to therapy. So as a result, it was deeply internalized trauma. And then she would reenact that because I've had therapy and I know that word. So, but it was interesting because it dovetails of certain historical points in America and our narrative that are often not openly discussed. Even today, like the Roe v. Wade decision, it's like, what does it mean if women have no access to abortion, really? My mother was the eldest of 8 children. What it meant is she was a parentified child. And also, birth control used to be illegal. Even when it was invented, doctors couldn't prescribe it to married women, and they weren't allowed to talk about it with women. So you had to already know that it existed and ask for it. And I didn't realize this until very recently. So I feel like writing about my mother is also about writing about these bigger societal issues. And so that's been very fruitful for me in this time period because I'm constantly reminded of these laws and these changes and these oppressive forces that impact women and impacted my mother and therefore impact me and me as a child. So I can kind of justify it as an essay because it's not over, right? And then in the fiction, I have mothers and daughters with fraught relationships that are kind of like pieces are taken from things I have experienced, but they can't be my mother because they have to resolve in a story. I can't just like kill the character off and say, well, that's how it resolves.
Right. Well, I think that the stories here sort of resonate more than they resolve, and I think that's true with your essays too. I mean, I'm really interested in your father's mother as a character and everything she achieved. But I don't know. I'll let you talk about that a little bit. But what do you think? Like, do you think that there's any commonality between your mother and your grandmother?
My paternal grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's so interesting. My mother loved my father's mother. My mother loved her mother-in-law. She's like maybe the one case of a woman who really loves her mother-in-law.
Oh, I love mine.
I mean, like super loves. Like she just admired her. She wanted to be her. She wanted to be her daughter. I don't mean that. I'm being facetious. I know that they're saying like of the trope. But she really loved her mother-in-law, which was thank God for our family, right? My father's close to his mother. Because her mother-in-law, my grandmother, was a strong woman, educated, a force for positive change in her society and in the family. She saved them during World War II in China, and they all credited her. They credit her with having saved them in World War II in China. And I think that these things were very compelling to my mother. she wanted to believe in the potential of women to do good in society. And so she loved my grandmother in this way. And that was good. It was positive. It helped me to understand my grandmother also.
Yeah. Well, back to Tomorrow in Shanghai. I love the way so many of the stories intersect with each other thematically. And I wanted to see, let's see, how did I phrase it? You've got themes of home, family, displacement. I'm interested in titling a story early in the collection called Life on Mars, which is a very diasporic story. And then later on, having a story that's literally set on planet Mars.
The question is like, was that just by design or?
Well, I mean, I feel confident it was by design, but that's just an example. Like when you were writing the stories, were you imagining them in a collection going side by side, and did you think about the other stories as you were putting them together? Was that an intentional thing, or does it just reflect your obsessions at that stretch of time?
Both. I mean, I definitely put them together with intention. And I had other stories out there that I chose not to put into this collection because I didn't think that they fit as well.
Oh, interesting.
And then I was working towards a Mars story. Just in life, I've always wanted to write that story. And finally, having this collection, I thought this gives me permission to do it.
Right.
When I first wrote the story Life on Mars, which is about the parachute kid from China who's sent alone by his family to live in like kind of rural Colorado, and they're hoping he'll put down roots and then sponsor them later. I always hope that would be the seeds for something that leads to like a Mars story. And there's references to Mars and Mars exploration in that story. But I hadn't, when I wrote it, I mean, that was years ago, I didn't know yet where it would lead.
Right. Well, I think this is the last question that I wrote, because I was sort of doing them in order of the stories, but I want to make sure I have time to ask it, because I love The Nanny so much. I think it's so cinematic. It would make an amazing movie. And like I can see, as someone who knows you, like somebody who knows your work might not know things like that you love Star Wars and that you have this fascination with cyborgs and science fiction. So can you talk about the process of taking current social issues and weaving them into such a speculative piece?
Wow, thank you. That's a great question and a great reading of the story. I have for decades dreamed of writing a sci-fi story. As you know me well. You gave me a little Star Wars figurine, which I still have for my office, from Rogue One. Yes. I am a child of the 70s. I loved Star Wars. I lived and breathed Star Wars. I've lost track. I really need to see Andor. I know I need to see it. I just haven't seen it yet. I don't have my Disney Plus subscription. And I have work to do. And I could go down that rabbit hole and just watch this forever. Yeah. So I wanted to write it. And the best sci-fi, I think, addresses social issues of the present, right? Like I don't know if do you like sci-fi? Did you like that?
I do like sci-fi. And actually, like, I kept thinking of the original Blade Runner when I was reading The Nanny and all that. I mean, I don't want to give anything away. I think of all the stories, it's important to sort of say the least about this one. But I felt like there were homages throughout to sort of, 70s and 80s movies that you and I would have seen and, had to see the sequel.
Yes, you got it. Also, the Stepford Wives.
Yes.
Stepford Wives. I was definitely thinking of the Stepford Wives, but in a Chinese context. And of course, Blade Runner, because Blade Runner is so interesting in that it's set in LA and like, I guess our present, like, was it 2017, right? Or 2019?
Yeah.
And it has this huge Asian presence. but not centered, right? It's just like the threatening background of Blade Runner.
Right.
And I love James Hong, the actors in it. He plays the guy who creates the eyes for the replicants. And I was so sad when he dies very early in the movie, right? And he's a creator guy. So I was thinking about flipping the lens rather than making Asians as like the threat to, I don't know, continued white supremacy.
Right.
But just like, what would it be in a Chinese context? What would this space colony be like? And so I was thinking of all these great sci-fi things that were dystopian and meant to warn people in the present, certainly us as children. We don't want this to be our future, but without like that horrific racism.
Yeah.
And also to give the women more agency, right? I thought like, I mean, I just didn't even think how to do that. I'm just like, why would I write it unless they are doing this, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so one of the things I was looking at during the pandemic was all these nanny ads on Nextdoor. Does Nextdoor exist in Wilmington?
It does, but I never go on it because it's always people having fights about the wrong holiday lights or noise or something. So yes, it exists, but I never go on it.
You're a better person than I. That's why. I was on Nextdoor and I'm stalking it because it's so horrible, right? It's like people post terrible things, but it's so dramatic. So I was taking screenshots of the nanny posts, and they were sharing like, oh, I need a nanny, and nanny has left, and they call their nanny, right? I was like shocked. And they were like, this is early in the pandemic. San Francisco was in a semi-lockdown, and so people were fleeing, going to second homes, and either nanny wouldn't go with them and they needed a nanny, or they were trying to find work for their nanny because they weren't taking her. And like, man, the things they wanted, like they would list like the duties of the nanny, but it'd be like, oh, no housework, just light housework. And like, you know, they don't need to do cooking, but then just make snacks. And it's like, it's housework and snacks, and they're schlepping these children back and forth to all these things. And like someone wanted, in addition to looking after their like older children, they also wanted someone to sleep train their infant. I was like, oh my God, it's so horrible.
Yeah.
So I wanted to write a story about a nanny from a point of view of the nanny, inspired by these horrible posts. And at the same time, there was this horrible attack in San Francisco of an older Chinese Toysonese woman who was struck on the street on 6th Avenue, like 6th and Market, if you know where that is in San Francisco, like around that area. It's South and Market area. And this crazed man, 35 years old, just punched this woman as she was waiting for Muni, the bus. And she had the wherewithal. She picked up a piece of trash and smacked him back. But then when the ambulance came, they took him and left her on the side of the road because they couldn't understand her dialect. And eventually people came and helped her, and including someone who could understand. But I just thought that's so horrible. And so I thought about writing it from the point of view of this immigrant woman. And originally I was going to set it in San Francisco or in Silicon Valley, but I couldn't do it because it was so depressing. And so then I thought, oh, this is where I bring out my love of the Mars colony idea and the Stepford Wives, and you know, I don't know, women having to fight against this kind of oppressive technology, and their jobs, and that's where the nanny came from.
I love that story so much. If there are any like people who have connections to like film agents, I want to see it made into a noir science fiction film. Have you read Clara and the Sun, Ishiguro's new book?
I have not. I should read that.
It's really beautiful. I think you would love it. Okay, so wind back earlier in the collection. I'm going to read this one. 2 moments I want to kind of toss at you from the discussion in The Monkey King of Szechuan. One is the scene where Esther's trying to get Grace and she's blocked by that couple who's posing for their wedding photo. And they have...
The siren?
Yeah, or is that from your apartment?
Me.
Okay. Life in the big city. So she's passing this couple that's having their photograph taken, and the bride sort of snarls at the groom, saying, "Don't touch my veil." And then a little bit later, she and Grace are looking at these Diane Arbus, or at a Diane Arbus photo. And Esther thinks she'd always felt Arbus's photos were a little mean, but she couldn't deny that they were powerful. Is the bride moment and other moments like that in the story interacting with that statement? Do you think that that is any kind of commentary on the effect that at least some moments in the stories that you're writing are meant to have?
It's a little bit mean but powerful. I don't know if I don't think
I'm interested in the power of sort of mean moments, or at least moments that sort of shed unwanted light on certain aspects, whether they're aspects of people's personalities or the ways that people interact or the ways that people see each other.
Such a smart question. I don't think I was consciously thinking of this. What I was thinking of was kind of the way women are encouraged to represent themselves, right? So brides and photos. It's supposed to be this happy, perfect moment of I don't know, performance of femininity, right? And I think that Diane Arbus, as one of the most famous women photographers and artists of the 20th century, her photographs are so interestingly staged in some ways, like her twins, I think, of photographs and other photographs. She really reveals things that we're told we're not supposed to see, right?
Yeah.
And she just puts it out there. And I feel like, so the meanness is because, oh, we're supposed to see people looking nice and sweet in photographs, but why? Right? I feel like there's a masking in that. Like even the use of the veil for the bride, right? Oh, don't touch it. She wants to present a certain way.
Right.
It's a status symbol, but it obscures a lot. And so I was thinking of Diane Arbus is kind of like not obscuring and making us see things that we're normally told to kind of avert our eyes from.
Right.
And I think that's interesting. I think it's compelling. But I guess I'm trying to look at things we avert our eyes from in that whole story, because it's a story about sexual harassment in academia, right? And these are former grad students who really wanted to do well, were very ambitious, and they were kind of kissing up to this famous professor. And one of them sleeps with the famous professor to try to get ahead, and then realizes later that that was actually sexual harassment. She shouldn't have given in. That, you know, this was an inappropriate relationship, which when she was younger and in school, she didn't see it, and she sees it now. And then the other student who sees him behaving badly and doesn't speak up.
Right.
So, and it's kind of the way women silence themselves for various reasons.
I love the way your characters think on the page. You know, they're not sort of roaring in with definite agendas or opinions. They're really sort of absorbing and working through the things that they're saying, I think, in that story in particular. So I read an interview with you on the City Lights website, and I was interested that you cited Gary Conley as one of your influences. And I wondered if you had ever read Far from the Tree by Andrew Solomon.
I have not.
It's about children who, it talks about like things that are passed down vertically from parents, and then horizontal traits that children don't share with their parents. And I thought about, he does not address race in that book, but I thought about it in terms of the stories in this book, like Lulu and Hong, these Chinese girls who feel Chinese, who have a white mother, and feels disconnected and othered and sort of not protected by that mother when those issues arise. I was so moved by that moment where, um, is it Lou or Hong who's surprised, the girl who's in France, and the
Home.
mother, Hong, so she's surprised that a person didn't question that her mother was hers. And this sentence in particular, Hong knew deep down it had to be racism, not her parents, but it felt like it was her parents, especially her mother. Like, do you see in those stories the mother working through these things as well, or is the onus just completely on the child to sort of see what's going on and work through it?
Because we're getting it from the point of view of the child, we don't get the mother's point of view. We don't, and that was a choice. I don't know. It would lose the tension if we see the mother, or maybe I could try it sometime, but I don't really. I don't know how to keep the tension if I see it from both points of point of view. So I was keeping it a very close third on the daughter, and she's wondering, does my mother understand? Does she see it? Because the mother won't say anything. The mother refuses to overtly talk about the racism that the family experiences and that the daughter has experienced it. And we see the daughter's impact kind of trying to understand, kind of reach out in one way, and the mother is trying to reach out in another way, because that's a story. Hong's mother is a story about a mother trying to reach out to her daughter, recognizing that they're going on different paths. She doesn't want to lose her daughter.
Right.
She doesn't quite know how to do it. So they have this weird, bizarre, miraculous experience.
It's such a great scene. Again, I would not want to I want a reader to be completely surprised by that scene, but man, I did not see that coming. It was so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, they go on a semi-religious pilgrimage to Lourdes, but that's not where the miracle occurs. And I feel like that's kind of like in real life, right?
Yeah.
We expect maybe mothers and daughters to meet on point where we want that meeting, but in life, it's going to come somewhere else. And that is, I feel, something I saw with my own mother, and I've been doing research, and I see other families that have this situation. You know, like there was an article on NPR interviewing mothers and fathers of adopted transracial adoptees, and there was a white parents of Asian children, and they were shocked by the waves of anti-Asian violence. And they're like, what do I say? What do I say? Should I say something? And it's like, yes, say something. Your children are experiencing this. It will help you. It will help them if their parents speak.
Well, I know it's Lulu who says that, there's somebody in the store who's essentially saying, oh, what a beautiful little child. Where did you get her? Like she's some sort of puppy that they got, like from a specific, I don't know. And Lulu says, well, she had sex with my father, and that landed me in her womb. And the mother's all, oh, don't be so impolite. But I mean, what a great moment of her speaking up and coming forward where her mother's not capable of it.
And that comes from life as well. When we moved from the New York City area when I was 12 to South Dakota, oh my God, so many of these women there would ask if I was adopted, or they wouldn't even ask. They would just assume I was adopted.
Right.
And they would go on and on and on about their relatives who had adopted quote unquote Oriental babies or children and how we all love them, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and I was feeling so uncomfortable. And in the beginning, my mother would actually tell them, I was in labor for 22 hours. And she would explain how much she suffered with me. And I love that. I love that because I was claimed, right? Yeah. But then over time, she stopped. And I'm sure she just got exhausted from it. It was exhausting. And it's racist, and it's exhausting, and it's othering a mixed race family. But I missed her speaking up.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, I don't know, maybe it was impolite of her to talk about labor to strangers, but
unless they were pregnant, it was okay.
Yeah, I felt like it was a good moment. So I kind of borrow that and kind of combine the silence of my later years with somebody speaking up and just saying the obvious. This is where the child came from. Hello.
Right. Don't make assumptions. So I loved reading Slow Train to Beijing, knowing about Lulu's past and her history, but I also love the fact that you don't really mention any of what we've just learned about her childhood in that story. And I wonder which story you wrote first.
When did I write it? I think I did write. No, actually, now I don't remember. I wrote a lot about Lulu that didn't end up in either story. And so I wrote like going forward, I wrote going past, I had some in the middle. I don't know. And these just turned out to be two separate stories. I no longer remember which came first.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I love reading them side by side and seeing the way they interact with each other. Okay, I'm not going to get to all my questions. I'm going to ask a question that's a little bit obnoxious. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. You like to start stories with a punch, I think. And I wonder, it made me wonder, go right into the heart of the subject matter with the jolt. I personally love this technique. I mean, if I sit down with a story that is just clearly not going to pull punches, I'm right into it. But it made me wonder how you feel about trigger or content warnings. Are you a fan or not a fan?
Of trigger warnings. Sadly, I didn't even think about that.
I mean, I guess they kind of function as their own kind of trigger warnings, somebody doesn't want.
I hope people didn't need trigger warnings for these stories. I mean, I don't think I stopped straight into the trauma. It kind of builds up.
I agree.
I don't know how to write a story that would have its own trigger warning. Can you do that when you write?
No. And I mean, I really don't, I prefer to not think about content. Like I want to surprise readers. So yeah, I'm not a huge, I can be talked into it in certain situations, but in general, I'm not a fan of content warnings.
I think what's important is being respectful to your character's humanity in the moment.
Right.
I don't want to write something that's exploitative. So I've shown people be murdered. I've shown characters who are talking about sexual harassment and just really deeply uncomfortable, and I don't know, just think of all the unfortunate things that have happened to my characters.
Yeah.
But I always want to center their humanity. I don't want to just exploit them. And I feel like the most important thing is that none of these horrible events are exploitative. It's not just to make people, I don't know, excited or feel an emotion when they're reading it. I really am working out the long-term consequences for my characters.
Yeah, I think you certainly achieved that. Absolutely. I'm thinking of, so this is a jump. I know we have to go to the Q&A really quickly, but I know you love a ghost. And I wonder if you want to say anything. I love that moment where Lily's grandmother appears and she knows it's not, she disappears and she's like, I know that was really her. That was no hallucination. So what do you feel a ghost lends to the story, and what do you tell your students who want to write a ghost story or put a ghost in an otherwise realistic story?
Well, ghosts are realistic. They are realistic. You're in the South. You know this.
I
visited UNCW a few years ago for Writers Week, I think it was. And my prompt was ghost stories. And I remember I asked this huge auditorium of people, who here has heard a family ghost story? And everyone was waving their hands and they all had incidents to share. And I love that. And I feel like that's something that Southern people will admit to. Whereas out here, it's so, I'm in San Francisco right now. It's like a shameful thing. People don't admit to their ghost stories. Like a lot of, I don't want to stereotype, but there are some Asian people who will admit to ghost stories because it's a traditional spiritual belief in many like East Asian, Southeast Asian cultures. But they're kind of like quite like, we had this ghost, or like, this is what they said. Whereas at UNCW, people waving their hands. Oh yes, this is what our ghost looked like, and this is where the ghost appeared. And they would leave hairpins. It's like a story you share.
Right.
And there were ghost tours in Wilmington. So,
yeah, they're separate.
Yeah. So one for the South, right?
I'm going to use, I wish we had this. I just spoke to the big 201 class. I wish I had brought that prompt to them. They would have loved that. Next time, that's what I'll do.
Ghosts without shame for seeing ghosts.
Yeah.
Even if the ghosts have shameful stories to reveal.
Absolutely.
One thing I want to just, Maggie is here, but I just want to say what I love about the Christie affair so much is you reveal, I won't reveal to others, a secret history that impacted many, many women around getting pregnant and childbirth. And I feel like this is so relevant to the present.
Yeah.
More so perhaps than when you first started writing this. And I was going to say, so I wanted to ask you, Nina, when you were researching and writing the Christie affair, did you know, or did you think how potentially relevant that backstory would be?
Yeah, I mean, I think sadly it's never not been relevant. It's always looming. And, people talk about The Handmaid's Tale being sort of this scary, prescient vision of our future. What it really is a vision of our past. I mean, this is most of women's history, sadly. Would be very easy to go back there.
Yes. Should we go to Q&A?
Yes. So the first question comes from Hannah, and she actually asked about the cover. She says, "What inspired you to go with this cover and perhaps not a different one?" So for reference, this is the cover. So
This cover.
Yes.
Well, I love this cover. We had a wonderful designer at Blair, Laura Williams, and she does a lot of really high-end covers for bigger publishers. And so I feel very fortunate that she also will do covers for me at Blair. I love how evocative it is of the themes. Like this could be the sun, it could be Chinese lanterns, it could be Mars. Because there's movement on the page, it looks like time, like the sun through the sky, but also multiples, like clones or something. And I feel like that it just evokes so much. And then there's like these wonderful gold scratches in the blue, which could be the sky, it could be water, it could be something else. It could be like cloisonne, but it's also kind of like circuitry, which is some of the themes of the stories. So for me, this cover was just so joyful to see it. So that's why I was like, yes, this cover, I love it.
Then a question we always like to ask our authors is, what are you currently reading right now? This goes to both Meili and Nina.
Nina, you start, and then I'm going to think of the title.
I am rereading The City of Your Final Destination by Peter Cameron. I'm teaching a grad class where we're reading novels about authors. We just finished Writers and Lovers by Lily King. We're going to read the hero of this book next by Elizabeth McCracken, which I'm so excited about.
I'm reading two books. One came out from Grey Wolf. It's a novel by Noor Naga, If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English. And it's just so interesting in the form. It's dual narrative, alternating voices between an Egyptian American woman who has gone back to the homeland of her parents to teach English, and a young Egyptian photographer who was very involved during the Egyptian Spring movement, and now that it has been suppressed, can't find work. And it alternates their perspectives, and every chapter begins with a question, and it's so interesting. And the question is very poetic, and so it's not literal. And then I'm reading a novel by Bushra Rehman called Roses in the Mouth of a Lion, and it's set in the Corona district of Queens from the Paul Simon song, Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard. And it's just all about Queens in the 80s, but it's from a Pakistani American Muslim community's perspective. And I just love the writing. The writing is poetic and so situated in place. And I find it really thrilling just to read the sentences.
Then our next comment comes from Enzo, and they say, "Hi, Nina and May. Nina, I love the Christie Affair, and May, I have purchased copies of both of your books, but I want to know, what do you suggest? Do you think I should read Tomorrow in Shanghai or Useful Phrases for Immigrants first?"
I don't know. Which do you think, Nina?
I think read them at the same time, like go back and forth, dip in and dip out. And although, okay, wait, I take that back because I think that there is a really important way that the stories in each book progress.
I feel like Tomorrow in Shanghai, it's very important to read in order because
Yeah,
there's an arc of the characters. And also because, as with the Lulu story, one, you meet her as a girl and then you meet her as a young woman, and it's meant to be
right.
read in order. And also, we're moving towards the future and we're moving towards Mars in the book. And
Right.
we're moving towards hope. And we're also moving towards kind of like active resistance to oppression. If the opening story is about an executed prisoner, which is, I mean, there's no hope for him, and there's complicity in the men around him. The ending is about women who are actively resisting. And so that's an arc. So if you start in Tomorrow in Shanghai, please just keep reading. And I think useful phrases for immigrants, it's not as straightforward an arc. You can kind of dip in and out of that one.
We have another comment. This one's from Tony, and he says, "Hi, Maylee. Because there were two Lulu stories in the book, I think I assumed that Lulu was more of a character based on you or one you identify with particularly. And I can't remember if there were Lulu stories in the last collection."
There was no story about Lulu per se in the last collection, but there were characters I definitely empathize with and feel in, I don't know if I identify with, and I just feel like they represent some of my values in useful phrases. Lulu, I gave more of my personal experiences to, like in terms of geography, in terms of time period, just in kind of just who she is as a person, although there's still fiction. But I'm glad you liked Lulu.
Um, so that is the end of our comments and questions. I just want to say thank you both, and thank you to everyone that came in and supported both of us. If you have any last words for the audience, please let me know. Let us all know.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Nina. It's so good seeing you. It's so joyful to have an event finally with you.
Yes.
I'm just it's just I miss you all. I miss you all at UNCW, and it's just been so nice to have this event.
Oh, well, we miss you too, and I'm so honored that you invited me. Thank you, Flyleaf, for hosting us, and thank you, Mayleaf, for writing another spectacular book.
And thank you. I'm looking forward to the movie.
Well, thanks everyone. Have a good night.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Mayleaf. Say
Bye.
happy birthday to your dad.
Well, thank you.